Welcome to my exhibit, Neuro Blooms, at the beautiful Distress House in Amsterdam. I'll give you a overall sense of the space first, and then I will stop and talk about a couple pieces. So as you can see, it's a pretty large space, which has been a really big pleasure to show in such a large space. The other really fun thing about showing in this space has been being able to show really nicely these double-sided pieces that I have, like this one. So they're literally hanging from the rafters and weighted down with sandbags. And then I also got to make this large installation on the back wall. And these are scraps of canvases cut out and attached to the wall. So I'll get up close to this piece first. The scraps of canvases include some images, some silkscreen images based on the Neuro Blooms PET scan, like these two. And then it also includes some scraps that I made into fabric index cards. And some have text on them and some don't. And some have text on them that are sort of representing maybe a person with a mental health condition, their thoughts. There's some descriptions that I've gotten from people's different written descriptions of the experience of mental illness. And I hear people and read about people talking about shadows a lot, particularly folks experiencing psychosis. This one is actually my father's handwriting, the word Kleenex. He had notes and lists all over his apartment. At the end of his life, he had dementia. And so he tried to manage it with just writing reminder notes and lists. And there were piles and piles of them all over his apartment. This one, some of the other language in this piece and in the show in general is some of the clinical language used to describe people with mental health conditions. And the language can be quite obtuse and cold and clinical. So I wanted to highlight some of that. You can see another silkscreen brain drawing here. And some of these are simply stains, blank stains that I cut out of the canvas. Other text includes, here's a line from a poem by Emily Dickinson, which appears to be very much about her experience with mental health condition. Here's another example of that clinical language that can be used to describe people with mental health conditions. I've heard this a lot: non-compliant or treatment resistant. And then here's an image of a bat. The whole piece is called The sleep of reason produces monsters. And this is a bat taken from that print that is by Francisco Goya. So for me, I really wanted to try and depict a little bit of the scattered and disjointed feeling of a mental health condition. And also, I think it can feel like a dream and like a nightmare. Then on the wall over here is my series called Unspeakable. And this is not based on brain imagery, but rather based on clinical drawings of women in the 19th century, particularly from a particular hospital in France, who were diagnosed mostly with hysteria. And clinicians, doctors in training would study these women by drawing them and photographing them in different stages of quote-unquote hysteria. And I was really compelled by the drawings being very beautiful, especially because they were done by doctors, which I thought was fascinating. They would study the different phases of hysteria as they tried to understand it. But there were ethically dubious parts of their methodology, which included putting these women on display while they were exhibiting these symptoms to basically to other clinicians, but also to the general public as almost like a form of entertainment. And then inducing symptoms, so they were almost performing, and inducing these symptoms often involved prodding them with something like a bar or even electricity to get them to display these symptoms. So while they might have had good intentions of trying to understand these illnesses, their methods were problematic. This is called Unspeakable Demonic Attack. And sometimes these women look quite monstrous, as you can tell. And take sort of writhing poses. And the color for me is often in most of my work here in this show is about sort of unsettling combinations of color, jarring, maybe unexpected. This is a bigger piece, about 48 inches tall, another demonic attack. So you can see how contorted these women are. So the other work in the show, here's another view of that big wall piece, are the brain stains. And you can see I have two walls of the brain stain pieces in this exhibit. And I'll show you a couple of those. Here's a small one, 10 by 10 inches. It's called Depression Stain Knotted. And again, these are based on PET scans of brains of people experiencing different mental health conditions. I'm particularly proud of this one because it was very long, meticulous process to make. If you know anything about embroidery, these are French knots. You have to make them individually, and they're quite time-consuming. I enjoy the stitching. I enjoy how slow it is, but sometimes the slowness can be somewhat frustrating. It's called Depression Stain, as I mentioned, based on a PET scan of somebody experiencing depression, which is something I have experienced. So very much relate to the colors in this piece being mostly dark blues and medium hued blues with just a small touch of warmer colors, warmer, lighter colors, which represents a more active part of the brain. And depression can often feel like your brain is asleep, not functioning well, foggy, and that there are only sort of small glimmers of activity. So to me, it's a really compelling image. Here's a schizophrenia stain. I think this is the first schizophrenia stain I've ever made. And you can see these are all acrylic paint stains on raw canvas with embroidery thread on top, with the exception of a couple of oil paintings in the show. Harkening back to my roots as an oil painter. This piece is called Dementia Stain, Darkness Visible. And dementia is also, I have a personal connection to that because my father had dementia at the end of his life. And to me, I made this sort of pocket and I stuffed it with embroidery thread, mostly black embroidery thread. And to me, that represented some of the grief involved in watching a loved one, my father, experience dementia over the years and sort of decline. The PET scan itself has this large black hole in it that represents utter lack of activity in the brain. And so I literally sort of took a deep breath, sharp breath inward when I first saw a PET scan of dementia. It actually really helped me understand and have empathy for my father and, you know, his deteriorating mind. This piece is called Anxiety Stain Buzz. It's the last piece I made before bringing all this work here. The color, again, and the activity of the color, really trying to represent sort of the rhythm and chaos that can exist in anxiety. And then I added these images of bees because in my most recent experience of anxiety, particularly during COVID, I really literally felt buzzing in my chest. And on this next wall, I'm working on a series. It's called Depression Stain, 4 Seasons. On the left is called The Fog of Spring. In the middle is winter. And on the right is summer. And I haven't made fall yet. And these are about sort of seasonal experiences of depression. And I'll walk towards one, summer. It's also a very recent piece. So summer can be a complicated time for somebody experiencing depression because there's almost an expectation that you're having pleasure. It's, you know, a season of vacation and nice weather. And it can be hard because what you're experiencing is kind of a disconnect with that. And so I chose sort of summery colors. And then I stitched words on the back that were actually description of a woman experiencing depression from that same 19th century hospital. And it was her going out. They made her go outside and she just sat on a bench and didn't move and averted her eyes from the sun. So I stitched that text on the back, and this is something I've been doing recently. What comes up on the front is this sort of garbled code, sort of a metaphor for what translates or doesn't translate, rational and irrational language, interior and exterior language. So last, I'll show you one of the double-sided pieces that's hanging in the middle of the room. This one is called Schizophrenia Stain, Word Salad. And you can see it's got some of that text, that backwards text on it. This is the most recent one of these double-sided pieces that I've done. I cut a hole in it. I think it kind of looks like a mouth. Also allows you to see through the painting, obviously. And then some abstract shapes. And the whole is really based on some of the shapes of the PET scan. So these pieces are getting more abstract, but this orange shape, for example, is still based on some of the shapes in the PET scan, and this one as well. And you can see sort of the faint outline of the brain. Also, the bats are here as well, the bat imagery. And then you can see on the back, I'm really working both sides of the canvas now. You can see some of the text that I've stitched. And that word right here is an example of word salad, which is sometimes schizophrenic people make up words, sort of absurd, long words made of actual words. So I decided to make some of my own, and this is supercalifragilisticexpialidocious steamer. Having trouble reading my handwriting. And then it has other text on here. Tenuous hold, cannot hold. And then some text based on a William Carlos Williams painting poem, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. So I kind of riffed off that poem. I think I will end there. It's another two-sided piece, ADHD stain. All right, maybe I'll just show you the back of that really quick. This is one where I also use that clinical language. Clinical language can be very discouraging. As you can see, fails to finish, often loses things, often does not follow through, often leaves seat. So you can imagine if you were reading this about yourself, sort of how discouraging that might be, even though there are reasons for this language and categorizing. And then in the upper right corner, I wrote calm, focus, pause. And that to me is potentially the inner voice of the person experiencing and what they may need to be telling themselves while they're having a particularly hard time. All right, that is the end of the tour. I hope you enjoyed it.